All right, welcome. Let's get some learning happening. Quick show of hands. Who has been to this training before? A few repeat. Not sure why you're here, but it's awesome to see you. Who here has some familiarity with the Trusted CI framework? Like you kind of know what it is. Okay, that's great. For those of you who we might gloss over some things, like please come find us if this is interesting to you. So I'm Craig Jackson. These are pictures of us when we were younger, by the way. So I'm Craig Jackson. I'm the Deputy Director at the Indiana University Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research. I've been involved in Trusted CI. I arrived just in time for the award to actually start. Really love this community. Recovering litigator, probably the person most to blame for this framework. So, your mileage may vary. Scott Russell is a senior policy analyst at CACR, also now deputy director for Sean for Trusted CI. What else? Lawyer.
That's good.
Yeah, all right. We've been working together a long time. We might even interrupt each other. We're allowed to be rude to each other when you work.
More likely, Craig will interrupt me.
Okay, I'm also his boss. All right, so quick overview. We're gonna real quick go over like what the Trusted CI framework is. Once we get done with this like housekeeping stuff, then I'm gonna hit step one of a three-step process that really any organization can use, whether you have our help or not, to kind of get going using the framework. Some of this stuff is going to seem really obvious. The idea is that it's obvious after the fact, and we did that for you. But I'm going to hit the assess piece. Scott is going to hit prioritization and formalizing strategy, and then we're going to end with a hypothetical and try to get you involved. This training's a little shorter this time, so we might try to clip along at a pretty fast pace. If you have questions, you want to continue discussion into the break, or any time this week, please track us down. All right. I want to talk about some outcomes, like what are we going for here? Training outcome one, you'll know how to take the first steps in establishing your own cybersecurity program, or at least seeing where your program aligns or does not with this framework. You'll understand some core fundamentals of an organized, programmatic approach to cybersecurity, and you'll be sensitized to some of the issues that impact the development of effective, efficient cybersecurity programs. Some things about getting the most out of today's session. We do encourage and want questions and discussion. That we love that part of it. Clarifying questions are welcome anytime, right? So if we're using jargon or something and you're just like, hey, can you back up a second? Please feel free to do that. We don't want to leave folks behind. Well, we have a couple of scheduled quick Q&A breaks through this. Capture your questions as you go along. We're very happy to share our slides with you. I think they'll end up on the Trusted CI website, but if you want them now or something, we'll get them to you. And again, very happy to continue discussions later. All right, so a brief overview of the Trusted CI framework. You saw this slide, or very similar from Sean yesterday. The framework is not about creating the most awesome, complete, expensive cybersecurity program you've ever heard of. It is a minimum standard for cybersecurity programs, okay? The idea is what is that minimum level of competency your organization needs to have a fighting chance to do cyber well? We've got in that 16 fundamental requirements. We call them musts because we're nice. We like the must as sounds better than requirement. It's based on best practice and evidence of what works. I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. It's designed at its core to be really universal and timeless, right? This thing is not going to go out of date in a couple of years. It's absolutely not going to be put out of date by something like adversarial AI. Those requirements are organized under 4 pillars, right? Those 16 things are broken up under the pillars of mission alignment, governance, resources, and controls. A lot of cybersecurity frameworks are really focused just on controls. We're really focused on that programmatic piece. Something that could help you as you go along, and where is Ranson? Ranson, hey. Ranson, if you want, you have some copies of this, don't you? Yeah, so if people would like a printed copy of this thing, it might be a nice little reference for you all. We can run around and get them to you. Or you can pull this up on our website, trustedci.org/framework/M1P, and you can get this one pager that lists all 16 of those things. So there's other cybersecurity frameworks out there. Why would you pick this one? Why have many organizations represented at this event picked this one? It's designed to support your mission. This is not checkbox compliance. It will enable the rest of your cybersecurity efforts, including using control sets and meeting compliance requirements in a sane way. We got, thoroughly depressed by the excellent compliance presentations this morning with all that stuff coming. This is going to help you with that, not distract you from it. It's targeted at and understandable by organizational leadership. This wasn't just built for techies, it's built for organizations. This is built on Trusted CI's extensive on-the-ground experience and R&D. And it's been increasingly validated in our research. CyberTrack, which I won't spend time describing, but it's a non-trusted CI program that Scott and I are both involved in, has shown a statistically significant correlation between these practices in the framework and actually getting implemented the most powerful technical, tactical controls, right? Enablement. Another reason that we love this is that, yes, there's a core team of people who researched this and developed it, but that development has been overseen by an advisory group of stakeholders from the corners of this community. And this is designed to be doable, right? It's a minimum standard. It's where do you need to get a fighting chance? We're not asking.
I'll chime in just real briefly. If Craig did not convince you, then I know this is the first one. It's on me. You are surrounded by framework adopters. And so if you don't want to talk to us, you could talk to a good chunk of the people in this room, in this conference. And honestly, we need to get like a framework adopter, like little flair for our name tags.
Yeah, we need to work on your flair.
Not just cats and dogs.
All right. Want to know, what is a cybersecurity program? We run into, this is a definitional thing that we do run into. This is adapted from our favorite project management guru, but a cybersecurity program is a group of related cybersecurity-focused projects and ongoing activities managed in a coordinated way to attain benefits not available for managing them individually. Right? It's this living, breathing set of activities, this coordinated activity idea. So what it is not, a cybersecurity program is not a plan. It's not some plan written down. It's not a policy. That's another written down thing. It's not a project that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's really this programmatic, ongoing thing. It's not a set of controls like the CIS controls or NIST CSF or NIST 800-171. The Trust CI framework complements and puts all of these things in context. Part of how we do that complementing is through the framework implementation guide for research cyber infrastructure operators. This includes both the general description of like, what are these musts? What are they all about in a general sense? But also a lot of advice tailored for the research community represented here. Lots of pointers to other templates and tools we've developed as well. If you want to get that, here's a copy of it. It is sort of thick. It's not that bad. It's not meant to be read like a novel, right? It's a reference resource. If you want to get that, check out our templates and tools. See the NASCAR logo thing of the adopters. Go to trustedci.org/framework and poke around in there. Okay, the last thing I want to do before shifting into step one of getting started is, I'm not going to read all 16 of these musts to you, but I want to give you a flavor of just how fundamental these are, right? So these are the mission alignment musts. If you're going to align your cybersecurity program to your organization's mission, among other things, must number 2, you got to identify and account for stakeholders and obligations. How can you have a cybersecurity program that's aligned to the mission if you don't know who your stakeholders and obligations are, right? We frequently see gaps here where there's stakeholders and obligations that are missing from cybersecurity's awareness. These are the governance ones. Must 5, organizations must involve leadership in cybersecurity decision-making, and we mean senior organizational leadership. Do we ever go around and find that that's missing? Yeah, very frequently in all kinds of different verticals. Organizations must develop, adopt, explain, follow, enforce, and revise cybersecurity policy. Does that mean you need one of every possible cybersecurity policy? No. No, you don't. In fact, that could be a terrible idea, but you need some. You need some stuff formalized so everybody can get on the same page. Resources. Must 11 is one of these. It's a hefty one. Organizations must devote adequate resources to mitigate cybersecurity risks deemed unacceptable by the organization. Okay? This is a choice. This is a decision that needs to get made. But don't find yourself in the crazy situation of having unacceptable risk and you're not doing anything about it. But here's something even more basic, must 12, right? Organizations must establish and maintain a cybersecurity budget. How would you know if you're spending too little or too much if you can't point to budget artifacts? And then finally, we do talk about controls, but at this programmatic level, organizations must adopt and use a baseline control set. We'll actually unpack that one a lot more in an example coming up. And then organizations must select and deploy additional and alternate controls as warranted, right? A relationship between those two. Just wanted to give you a quick flavor of what these requirements look like if you're not super familiar. Okay, we're running about tight on time. We might have time for one quick question, if there are any. Otherwise, I'll just keep trucking.
How do you track the bus in this framework, especially senior leadership activity?
How do you recommend tracking the must items to prove that you've done it, especially senior leadership involvement in decision making?
Well, we're about to give you one example of how to do that. I mean, that is this in many ways the activity we're just about to describe. So great question, but I think let's see if we can come back to that one because we could get into some nuance. Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right, getting started. First steps in implementing the framework. First, a little more context on getting started. If you haven't really done a lot of this stuff yet, you've got a pretty nascent, relatively immature cybersecurity program. You're not going to get all of these to implementation in a day, right? This is going to take time, and that means prioritization. And you're probably not going to be able to make a lot of progress on these all simultaneously. Again, prioritization, right? You're not going to push every rock up the hill at the same time. Also, organization situations vary a lot. There is no single correct priority order for which of these things you tackle when. You need to develop a plan, and I think there's lots of reasonable ways to do that. But folks are at different stages in their organizational life cycle, different missions and priorities, different current levels of capability, different threats. This is a community where we see very different threats, especially the really scary ones. It's not all the same from place to place. But the very first, at a level of altitude we're going to go, the very first steps can be the same regardless of where you are, okay? One other contextual note, I'll call this step 0, is the question of do I even need a cybersecurity program? This comes up a lot in this community because many science organizations are units of bigger organizations in some way, shape, or form, or they're collaborations, right? Where Trusted CI is a virtual organization. For For some represented here, like major facilities, this is a no-brainer. You need a cybersecurity program. We don't really care what kind of relationship you have with even a parent institution. Your mission is going to be distinct enough and complex enough. You need a cybersecurity program, even if it's a modest one. But this is a live question for other kinds of projects and organizations in the community. I just recommend having a look at Appendix A in here. It's a long list of factors to consider in deciding, does my organization need a cybersecurity program?
I'm going to interrupt one more time. I'll just do a quick plug for a panel tomorrow, which is going to be specifically about NSF mid-scales, which tend to fall into that category of, well, we're a project, but we're embedded within like an R1 university. Can't we just let the university do our security? And the answer is almost always, no, you got to do at least some stuff yourself.
And a lot of communication and coordination, but yeah. Thanks, Scott. After saying that I was the interrupter, I love it. All right, so here are the three main steps. Step 1, assess where your program is. Step 2, determine your priorities. Step 3, formalize your strategy. I'm going to take this first one. All right, assess. All right, why is it important to assess? This may be painfully obvious, but like the purpose of any cybersecurity assessment is or should be to inform decision making, right? The score, the grade, or whatever, that's not the point. The point is to give you information so you can figure out what to do next. So especially when you're talking about a minimum standard, this is fundamental for prioritizing next steps. Where are the gaps, right? It's a minimum standard. Where are we not meeting that minimum? Also, many organizations that we see are implementing, are doing well on some musts and haven't given much thought at all to other ones, right? So distinguishing that, seeing kind of what your profile is and seeing where the gaps are is important. Side note, and some folks here have been involved in the framework cohorts. There are other ways to do this assessment. Like these, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but when Trusted CI does a validated self-assessment of a major facility or mid-scale or a high-performance computing center, we use a 4-tier rating approach to describe what you're doing on each must. A little more complicated, not suggesting you do this on your own. If you're interested in framework cohorts, talk to him. Okay, so what we're suggesting is a lightweight self-assessment where you look at the language of each must statement, right? Like organizations must involve leadership in cybersecurity decision-making, and the start of each FIG chapter, right? So there's 16 of them. If you just read like the first page, right? Don't even flip, don't even complete that paragraph. You'll get a good sense of what that must is all about. And for each of these, ask yourself, are we doing this? If the answer is no, then why not? If it's sort of, why, right? We're partially doing this, we're doing this in part of our organization. Well, why is that? If it's unpredictable, intermittent, why is that? Well, leadership is involved sometime, but it's really inconsistent. Do you have any sense of why? Are there barriers to full, predictable, maintainable implementation of these things? And then if the answer is yes, we're implementing this, then great. How is it going? Is the implementation satisfactory? Back in our more complex scheme, you really want to get to green, which is implementing, but optimizing is there for a reason. It's not to make you feel especially good. It's because sometimes, we've been implementing having a cybersecurity lead, but the communication around that leadership role or where that person reports in the organization is not working great. We need to rethink it. So this lightweight self-assessment idea, it's going to be potentially pretty easy if you're very young or disorganized when it comes to cyber, right? You're going to, no, we're not doing this, and it's going to be an exploration of barriers or why things haven't kicked off. This might also be pretty easy if you have a pretty mature cybersecurity program, right? You may have plenty of cybersecurity challenges, but you may be knocking all of these out. Many organizations in this community and in other communities where we do framework assessments are somewhere in between, right? It's a mix. So this is not just general good advice. I really do think these are some key commandments here for when you're going to go do that lightweight assessment. Yes, sort of, no, with some exploration of why. Do write it down. When you're writing stuff down, focus on the facts. Be honest. Focus on the facts. Share, validate, discuss. Even if you are that cybersecurity champion for your organization, don't try to do this in a vacuum. Take this as an opportunity to have some discussions with people. Try to get to some ground truth. Do use the FIG as a reference tool. Again, you don't have to read it like a novel. Use it as a reference tool. Flip around in there. And do use the output to drive some decision making about what you're going to do, about what your organization is going to do. Some do nots, some don'ts. Don't think of this as an audit, a score, or a grade. You'll notice we're not suggesting you even give yourself an implementation rating level, right? This is about qualitatively understanding what's going on or not. Do not treat every piece of great advice in the FIG as mandatory, right? This is designed to be flexible. There's a lot of good advice in here, but there's more, I like to say, there's more than one safe way to get to grandmother's house through the woods. And sometimes all we're trying to do is give you one of those paths. And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like with a lot of things in life, this is about iteration. It's better to get some movement than to try to make every policy or every decision or every structure perfect.
I'm going to jump in here just one more time. I'm racking up points against Craig. He's got to catch up in the second half. The one point I think I really want to reemphasize is the be honest point on this, especially when you're doing self-assessments. There's this sort of natural desire to give yourself a better score, and that can be detrimental, right? You really want to go into this with kind of a little bit of humility, because the goal is to help you make progress. And you're not going to make progress if you're pretending like you exercise every day when you really only go once a week or something like that.
And that, okay, good point. And that's part of why I emphasize focusing on the facts, right? Because if you're going to be hella honest, and you might want to actually be able to share the results of this exercise with leadership, with your peers or whatever, people might still get wound up. But if it's just about the facts as you understand them, it's less likely to piss people off than if it's a lot of opinion, a lot of characterization. Okay, that came back. So, just going to run you through an example of doing, model doing this lightweight assessment on one must. I'm going to introduce you to the first of two science organizations here. This is CZ Hub, where the slogan is "The magic is in the aggregation." All right. I'm going to do a fair amount of reading off the slide. It's the only way to do these. So CZ Hub is a government-funded research cyber infrastructure facility designed to aggregate cryptozoological research data and make it available to researchers. CZ Hub has been operational for a few years. Barbara is a sysadmin and the de facto cybersecurity champion for CZ Hub. She and her colleagues in IT don't have a lot of time or resources for cybersecurity work, but they've managed to get a few cybersecurity best practices in place that you'd find in the CIS controls or the NIST cybersecurity framework. Barb heard about the Trusted CI framework from colleagues at Sasquatch, who we'll meet later, and liked the sound of a cybersecurity standard that actually addresses communication, people, and money. That said, being a hardcore techie at heart, she starts her lightweight self-assessment with MUST 15, about a baseline control set, and she's got a highlighter. So let's look at this. So this right here is that language that's when you go into the FIG, this is the language in the box that just kind of trying to give you the definitions of what those terms are in the MUST itself. Controls are specific, administrative, technical, blah, 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 blah. What's a baseline control set? A baseline control set is a predetermined set of controls used as a default when selecting cybersecurity controls for information assets. This baseline control set doesn't dictate exactly what you have to implement. It provides a foundation for an organization to make tailoring decisions, to decide what to implement and to what extent. Sometimes baseline control sets are legally imposed for handling some types of data, right? CUI being a hot example. But in other cases, organizations can select a well-maintained control set that is based on evidence of what works to reduce cybersecurity risk. So that's her reading and her highlighting. All right, so she's going to ask herself, are we doing this? If not, why not? If it's sorta, why? Is it partial? Is it unpredictable? What are the barriers? And if yes, great, how's it going? So on are we doing this? I keep wanting to say Bob because Bob calls us here the father of the framework. I'm the mom, he's the dad. Barb talks this over with her IT colleagues and writes, not really. We've implemented some of the controls that you find in these baseline control sets, but we haven't formally adopted a baseline control set. And we certainly haven't used one in any systematic way. Fortunately, we're pretty sure that there is no requirement of any particular control set. We've even checked the cooperative agreement. I think the main barrier to doing more is time and resources. The FIG suggests that adopting and using the CIS controls. That seems pretty doable, especially if we tailor control selection in a prioritized way. The CIS controls come prioritized, and we could start with implementation group 1. I know we're already doing some of this stuff, but we have some gaps. So Barb bundles this reflection with a handful of other must assessments and uses the product to start a conversation with the IT director about how to build a basic cybersecurity program. I'll note, if you think back to what Barb had to say, are they doing this? No, sort of, somewhere in between. The point here, though, is that it looked to me like a pretty honest characterization of where she thought they were, right? And I think we see, even in as simple an example as that, we're checking these boxes, right? It's written down, it's focused on the facts, looks to me like some honesty there. There's some discussion. She discussed with colleagues, used the FIG as a reference tool, and now working with people to try to drive decision making. Didn't see anything in there like treating this like a score, right? This is about reality. This is about getting this stuff done. No evidence here of treating everything in the FIG as mandatory. And this is just a couple paragraphs, right? Definitely not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good at this phase. Okay. I'm doing great on time. Yeah, and so, with all those interruptions. So would love to answer some questions, if there are any, about the framework, about this first step.
We got a question back here.
What is 240? All right.
No. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, this is, hi, this is a great presentation. And I have a quick question, like we submit like NSF or NSA accreditation or some kind of process. So we prepare document or some requirement document and we send to SS. So what is the process in order to get CI? First step.
Scott, did you hear that well?
Maybe, can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. So like in NSA or ABET, right, in order to get accredited by ABET, so we need to submit some kind of minimum requirement document in advance. So do you have any kind of requirement like to the part of CI?
I think like to be accredited. I mean, I think if I understood the question right, what I would say is we're not in the position where we're like accrediting anyone or saying like, yes, you are now compliant with the framework. What we're really trying to do is give you a tool set to help you tackle this. I mean, ultimately, we don't want to become another standard that you're like, oh man, I have to do, NIST 800-171, and I've got to do the Trusted CI framework, and I get audited against both. Ultimately, we're trying to make this a tool that makes it so that when you need to go after these other things, if you have to be something from the NSA, this will actually help you get it done. But I guess I should also, this is another plug for the cohorts, where if you're looking for not just doing this yourself, you want like us to basically come in and kind of validate what you're seeing. That's what we do in our longer cohort engagements. We've got one coming up in January, and that's when you'll be in a small group, you're working with Trusted CI, and we go through all of these musts, and we help you figure out where you are on each of them, and then help you figure out where to go from there.
Yeah, and in that setting, you don't get a score, but for each must, you would be optimizing, implementing, developing, or not implementing. So you would have, to some extent, a quantified result. That what we found with self-assessment, there's a lot of self-assessments out there that ask people to do, in my opinion, just an impossible amount of analysis on their own and have all of these levels and calculations that you're supposed to do. And it's just like, I just don't believe that's helpful in a self-assessment environment. And we know, we've seen organizations, Rick Wagner's an example. Somebody all he did was attend this training, picked up this process, and he was able to go from, that current organization, no program, to quite a start at a program. So.
Yeah, with the next question. Why are you calling it a cybersecurity framework instead of a cybersecurity strategic planning framework? Because what I hear is there's already too many frameworks for cybersecurity.
Well, Don, you used the word framework in both of them, I think. Now, why don't we call it a strategic planning framework? We have a cybersecurity strategic plan template. In those framework cohorts, we work with the cohort members to get a big start at building a cybersecurity strategic plan. So strategic planning is definitely part of what the framework is about, but I would say it's not only that, right? Like, an organization that has like an informal cybersecurity lead who's not being paid to do that job, who's just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, that take that step and programatize that and honor that, and therefore implementing must 7, to me, that's a win. And that may not be strategic planning, but that's a move in the right direction. I don't know did that answer or kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it's just I hear pushback, like another framework.
Another framework. I actually skipped a slide that the title in the slide is why another cybersecurity framework. So I'll just answer that a little bit more. There is no other, maybe we could do away with framework. I do think this is a framework. I think it's fair to call it that. There is no other cybersecurity framework in the wild that is entirely focused on building a cybersecurity program as a capability of a business or an organization. All the other frameworks are either process frameworks that have a lot of process detail or they're control frameworks. They're just big control catalogs, lists of things to go implement at a tactical level. So why another one? Because there wasn't one like this. We felt it was needed. And like I said, we're now seeing research that's we built this, our R&D process had a lot to do with seeing what the barriers were to getting that technical stuff done. And you see those enough times and you start to see the patterns, we can start to build that into generalized guidance. But now what we're seeing is empirical evidence that the organizations that do these things, they're the ones able to get those controls implemented. The ones that don't really struggle to get off the ground with MFA, even secure config, things like that.
I'll chime in on that question as well, just briefly. And I think it actually ties in pretty well to transitioning into my slides. So it's a win-win. On the sort of like, why isn't this just a strategic planning framework? I think the way I would think about it is that the two activities feed into each other. So the purpose of strategic planning is to help you figure out what to do to make where you are in the framework better. And then you use the framework to inform your strategic planning. So it's kind of like they're the same thing, I think. And I think any good framework needs to incorporate that future element. Otherwise, it's like, when we said framework, I think what we're really saying is another compliance regime. And I think those two are very different. And so we're trying not to be a compliance regime. We're trying to be a useful framework.
That was a much nicer answer than mine. Thank you, Scott. Good question. Any other questions before we move on? Or comments? All right.
Let's do it. Yeah, now that I have interrupted Craig 3 times, maybe 4 if you count that last one, he's going to be just chomping at the bit.
Just watch my restraint.
Yep. All right, so Craig started off, he explained how we got here, talked about the first step, which is basically figuring out where you are right now, kind of going to my comment just a second ago. Step 2 is about starting to pick that path forward. All right, so the context here is, and Craig said this, I think, earlier, you don't want to, like, let's say you're facing a whole lot of red in your framework scorecard. You don't want to push 16 stones up the hill at the same time, right? It's not tractable. Stones are going to fall back down. You're going to be Sisyphus over here. And so that's one important piece of context. Don't do everything at once. The other one is not everything is going to be equally important right now. There are some stuff that might be really important for you right now and other stuff that, well, it's important long term, but you could maybe push it off for a little bit. And so the goal of this step is basically to prioritize, right? It's right there in the name. You want to pick the musts that are the most important for you to prioritize in the short term. Try and coordinate that with what is actually going to be important for your mission. So you don't just like pick them in a vacuum, pick them in the context of what you're actually trying to do. And then going through and say, all right, what do I need to really start first? What do I need to get done first? And are there any factors that play into how I'm going to make that decision? So what am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? Let's have an intelligent conversation about how we make that decision. So the easy answer is we'll focus on the gaps, right? You do a gap analysis and then you prioritize the gaps. That can work in some contexts, right? If you're doing great on a lot of things, but you've got 1 or 2 bits of red in there, then great, focus on those bits of red. So if you answered no in that self-assessment Craig talked about, those are almost always going to be a pretty important thing to prioritize. And in those contexts, even moving from a no to a sort of, right, just making a little bit of progress can actually be a big jump in terms of your security because it's gone from a complete blind spot to something that you're actually working on getting better. That being said, for a lot of organizations we're engaging with, there are a lot of gaps. Enough gaps that you can't just say, oh, pick the gaps and prioritize those. You have to do some prioritization within the gaps. So, rule number 1 here, don't panic, right? It's okay. We see this a lot. It's not the end of the world. But you do need to be strategic in how you choose what you're going to work on first. So basically what we're going to do in this section is really talk about some factors that are going to go into how you want to think about this. Because, every organization is unique. Everyone's a special snowflake, but you're not that unique. I think the line I use is that every snowflake still melts. And there are some common factors that are going to be a driving force behind your choices. And if you can kind of identify, well, I fall into this category and this category, that will actually help you a lot in determining what you should be prioritizing. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is basically a starting point that we find covers a good number of use cases for this community. So I'll walk through a couple of these in more detail, but where are you in your life cycle? What kind of organizational structure are you? Kind of like Craig was talking about. Are you a big standalone? Are you embedded within a parent? Are you a virtual? Those are going to be very different in terms of how you're going to think about your program. What kind of resource constraints are you dealing with? Have you recently had any incidents, or are you currently dealing with an incident? Do you have to deal with compliance? Something we've heard about a lot today. So the first factor we want to think about here, that I'm going to talk through, is where are you in your life cycle? So if you are operational, most likely you want to focus on putting out fires, being prepared for incidents, like getting some operational capabilities up and running, because you could get hit at any moment. And so we tend to say, okay, in that case, focus on having a good baseline control set, get some of those foundational controls in place, maybe work on your policy, particularly some incident response policy, so that if you do have an incident, you're not running around with your head on fire, you have some idea of how to move forward. And then probably work on getting some personnel time to actually go do these things. Whereas if you're still in construction, maybe now is a good time to focus on setting things right early on, making sure that your cybersecurity program is actually well aligned to the mission. So like must one, having your mission focus, this is a good time to get this right. You can actually think about longer term planning for your organization. Or must three, this is like get a grasp on your information assets, just what all is in your environment. That's something every organization we've ever talked with has said, oh, that's really hard. Yeah, we struggle with that. We've been doing this for 15, 20 years. Yeah, we struggle to just get a grasp on all the stuff we have. And so if you can start early on that, that is a huge head start. It's still gonna be work, right? This is not something you just get done with, but if you have a better grasp on it, then you're not playing catch up all the time. Going on to another one of these big factors that can play into it is, what is your organizational structure? So like we said, are you embedded within a larger organization, right? Are you a science project that's within R1 university? Well, you have resources you can take advantage of, right? You probably still have to do some security stuff for yourself, but that parent organization is going to be there as a resource, and you should be able to reach out to them and figure out what those things are. So one of the things we say here is get a grasp on your stakeholders and obligations. One of your big stakeholders is that parent organization. Make sure you have a good relationship there. You've got good contact. Craig wants to jump in. I can feel it. And then get a good sense of what are the resources that this parent organization can provide. Because a lot of universities might have like training licenses for NOBIF or something like that. And they're probably not just going to throw it at you. You might have to go and talk to them, have a conversation. Or they might have licenses for Duo. I mean, there's a ton of potential resources that are there that you want to make sure you have a conversation about. That being said, flip that around. If you are a standalone facility, right, you're out on your own, you're on the hook for just about everything. So you need to make sure you have your controls in place, because you don't have a whole lot you can fall back on. You can't say, well, yeah, I don't have a firewall, but someone else does, maybe. No one else is looking out for you. So you want to make sure you've got your good baseline controls in place, and then figure out any specialized needs you might have. And that's what this must 16 is about, is what is special about you that the baseline just isn't going to cover. Because again, we try and mold your framework to what your needs are. And the baseline is there as a starting point, but it is not the end of the story. And then if you're something like Trusted CI, right, you're multi-institutional, you're collaborative, you're kind of a weird structure, it doesn't fit into the kind of we normally think about organizations, well, then you need to make sure you're coordinating between that complex stakeholder relationship. So going back to stakeholders again, you need to understand who are all the players at all the institutions that you need to be aware of. What things do they have in place already? If you're, relying on a cybersecurity program at multiple different universities, then you want to know, what are those different programs doing? What are they not doing? What do they cover? What do they don't cover? All of that's going to be incredibly important for when you're thinking about your program as the virtual entity. Information assets, again, understanding what is a virtual organization asset, and then what is one of those parent organization assets? Where are the lines fuzzy? And let's make sure we can figure those out. Talking about risk acceptance, because if there's that many different players who all have an interest in what we're talking about, you want to be clear who's accepting risk on your behalf and who's not. You don't want there to be blind spots where no one's accepting risk and stuff's just happening. But you also don't want multiple people who think that they're, the one in charge, and then you get some conflict in the decisions that are being made. And finally, talking through policy. I think policy is one of the ways you're going to deal with all of the complexities of your stakeholder relationship. And then talking about incidents. So if you've recently had an incident, I think, you'll probably, you'll take a moment to calm down. The don't panic thing is going to come up again. But then you want to say, we just had an incident. What can we learn from it? So talk about must 10, evaluate and refine. Are there things that we can do differently in response to that incident? Almost definitely. Then go back to your must 9 and say, hey, we just had an incident. Do we need to update our IR policy? Did we not have an IR policy and now we want to get one? And then going back to information assets and saying like, hey, do we have a good grasp on what we had when the incident was happening? Or do we need to go work on that? Do we know how we want to do that better? having dealt with an incident where we're probably saying, what the crap, what is affected? How do I deal with it? And then talking about compliance, maybe you just got told that you have DB gap data and you've got to do 800-171. Maybe you think some future compliance is coming for you. There's a ton of compliance regimes. I'm not going to talk through them, but you want to make sure you have a good grasp on, must-to, stakeholders, and obligations. And obligations is where compliance really fits in, but stakeholders too, because the stakeholders are probably where those compliance obligations are coming from. So have good communications with your stakeholders and get a good grasp on what those obligations are going to be. And then look at your baseline control set, because most compliance is controls. And so they're probably saying you've got to do these 110 controls, or hopefully not more than 110, but if you're getting FSMA, who knows? So, and a last point I think is important to note here is we've been talking a whole lot about, like, let's shore up those gaps. So, where any place it's red, can we get it to orange? Can we get it a little bit better? Another way to prioritize could be to prioritize those easy wins. You might say, hey, I've got this thing over here. It's orange. I think I could get it to green with just a week and a little bit of, legwork. That could be a good way to really kickstart your program, build some momentum. It could be that that's a really important precursor to some other activities you need to do. So you might be thinking like, hey, if we can just get a little bit of personnel time, I can use that personnel time to go make all these changes I need to make. Well, let's prioritize that first. And yeah, and it's a great way to build momentum. So looking at the gaps is important, but sometimes you also want to look at the things you can get done or get to a really good place. How am I doing on time? I think I'm doing all right. A second if anyone wants to ask any questions or follow up on any of that. It's also an excuse for me to drink water. All right, cool. Then I'll just keep on rolling. So the final step is strategize. And so if the second step is like figure out what your priorities are, step 3 is let's turn this into a strategy. Let's make this really concrete. Let's make it actionable. Let's make it so that we actually get those priorities done. And so we say here, having a strategy is good, but what we're really looking for is a strategy that is formalized and that has organizational buy-in. That's how you're going to actually make progress on things. And so a lot of what we're going to do in this step is try to help you build that leadership buy-in, help show how all these cybersecurity things we're trying to do are actually connected to the overall mission as a way to get that buy-in. And as part of that, you're going to articulate a strategy, right? That kind of goes to that prioritizing we talked about. What is our actual cybersecurity strategy? And once you have all those things, you can start laying out a timeline. When are we getting things done? And let's set some actual milestones. So I'll just do a quick plug here. You've already heard about it a little bit for Trusted CI Cybersecurity Program Strategic Plan. This is our strategic planning template. It's available on our website. You got the link right there. And this is something that we walk through if you go through the cohort process. That's the second half of the cohort, basically. But it is a model for your cybersecurity program strategic plan. We think it's pretty simple, pretty easy to use, and it's very customizable. So this is not a, like, hey, it's our way or the highway. This is a foundation. Now make it work for what you need. And it's full of extra guidance, context. Like we have little blue boxes we put in there that'll help you actually make use of that document. So it's not just like a Mad Libs where you fill in your organization's name and you get a policy that no one ever looks at. Okay, so talking through just some strategic planning basics. We have this question, what does the strategic plan do? I don't know if anyone remembers this commercial, but this is one of our favorites. What does the washing machine do if you wash the dishes before you put them in there? So what does the strategic plan actually do? We think it really should do 4 things. The first one is state your organization's mission. So again, this is their cybersecurity strategic plan. First thing you need to do is understand what is the entire organization trying to do. We don't want cybersecurity off in a closet doing its own thing. It should be directly related to what the organization's trying to do. So once you state that, and I'll go into a little more detail about that, you want to then describe how the cybersecurity program is going to support that mission. Because again, security is not in a closet. It's an integral part of the organization. Once you describe what the cybersecurity program does, you want to establish a strategy. And as I'll say, a strategy is not something that you are doing in perpetuity. A strategy is time limited. It's what am I doing over the next 3 years to get to my next set of goals? And once you have that strategy, you're going to lay out that timeline of strategic outcomes and milestones. Basically, what are the specific things I want to get done that are going to then further that strategy? So we think at its basics, those are the 4 steps you want to do, or the 4 parts of a strategic plan. I'll go through each one of them in a little bit more detail, but I'm not going to, I could talk about this forever and I'm going to try not to. So the first one, state your organization's mission. The goal here is you just want to succinctly state the high-level goals and priorities of your organization. So we're really trying to focus here on what does your organization actually do? What do they actually care about? Avoid things like, the sort of fluffy mission statement, which sounds great but doesn't give you any information. Look at what are your current priorities? What are your major initiatives? Or what are the core functions, the things that are integral to what we actually do as an organization? That's your mission. And the goal of this step is basically to state that succinctly. And the way you're going to do this is by engaging your organizational leadership, engaging stakeholders, and getting their perspectives, because those are the people who are going to have the best perspective on what the organization's mission is. Once you've done that, you've got a relatively concise statement of what your organization's mission is. You want to say, what is the cybersecurity program's part in this? And so this goal is to state how the cybersecurity program supports the organization's mission. And so there are a ton of examples here. We actually have a way we break this down where we actually map the cybersecurity program to each thing this organization does. But some examples at a very high level are, hey, we protect the integrity of scientific data and data flows. We ensure the availability of high uptime equipment. Or maybe we provide security as a service to a number of smaller projects. All of these things are potential missions, right? The core thing that the cybersecurity program does. Once you have a clear sense of what that cybersecurity program mission is, and again, validated it with your leadership, so they're like, yes, we think that's what security does too, then you want to set out a strategy. And that's your approach to implement your mission over the next period, over whatever that strategic planning period is. So we say, should be time limited, because your strategy is going to change over time. What's important right now should not be the same thing as what's important in 5 years. And it should be directly tied to the mission you said in the previous step. So you don't want to say hey, we're really focused on integrity, so let's go do all these confidentiality controls. That doesn't necessarily make sense. You want to make sure those two things are really well aligned. So some at really high level examples of things that could be a strategy. One, you might say, look, we're focused on triage right now. We need to put out the fires that we know are already in our organization and move from there. Or you might say something like, yeah, we're going to focus on trying to keep security's job as simple and minimal as possible because we don't have the resources. We have, a million different strategies that we kind of talk through. Again, this is something we go into a ton more detail in the cohorts. But this is just giving you an idea of hey, what is your actual focus? What are the things that are the most important? Kind of going back to step 2. And then the last step here is building a timeline of strategic outcomes and milestones. And the goal really is just to make these things concrete and time limited, right? We're trying to actually make sure progress happens. One of the ways you do that is to set some goals and then actually check that you're achieving those goals. So these are not abstract things. They should be very concrete, tangible. You should be able to say after the fact whether or not you did it, right? That's a good test of whether or not it's a good outcome or milestone. And a couple of good things we think to consider as you're coming up with this timeline. One, think about things that you might need to start soon. The classic example here is if you're going to hire a CISO, sometimes that takes a really long time. It's hard to find good candidates. You might have a lot of internal process you have to go through. So getting that hire started could itself be a milestone. Because if you just say hire a CISO and then you say, oh, we missed our deadline and we haven't started, you could be off by another 6-8 months, something like that. So that's one thing to consider. Also want to consider things that are really important to finish soon. So the example we like to use is having half of an IR policy isn't that helpful. You're like, okay, page 1, who should I call? And then it's blank. No, you want the IR policy to be finished to be useful. Now, a lot of times the milestone won't necessarily have this distinction, but we do like to call it out. And we're actually going to talk, you'll see some specific examples of what timelines of milestones will look like as we jump into one of our hypos. But I will pause again if anyone has any questions so I can drink some water. I'm just such a clear communicator, no one has any questions. It's really amazing.
If I can, I want to come back to the gentleman in the back asked about how do you track leadership involvement? Like how do you how do you measure that? Like what is that even supposed to mean? I'm looking at a rubric that we use when we really assess that in detail. First, when we're talking about leadership, the leaders we're talking about have to be sufficiently senior in the organization that they can do things like spend resources. Right. So, I've worked with organizations that have a CIO, but that CIO is like way down in the org chart and that's not going to, it has very little authority. It's not going to be enough. So we're looking for that level of seniority. When we say involvement in cybersecurity decision making, we're typically looking for those senior leaders to make at least some of the big decisions, right? Are you going to hire a CISO? What's the budget going to be? And that doesn't mean that senior leadership has to sign off on and be involved in every stinking operational, decision, but we need some clear decision making on some big stuff. And then we're really looking at regularity, right? So like a really good sign, and again, like we keep saying, there's more than one way to do this, but if you have a cybersecurity lead and that lead has some regular predictable cadence or channel to communicate with the people who really make decisions in that organization, like that's a good sign. If it's completely unpredictable or it's driven only when something really bad happens, right, that's not looking so hot on must 5. Anyway, it was a good question. I wanted to come back to it if we had time. Cool.
All right, I still have the lead as it goes to interruptions, so I've got that in my favor. Let's see, this is still me, yeah?
No, it's me. I'm doing the start of this, and then you're going to manage the discussion. I'm going to run as fast as I can down there. Okay, so this is kind of the last section of the training. We're going to present you. We only have time for one hypothetical today. We're going to present you this hypothetical science organization. We're going to talk about that organization's mission, some facts, some interesting facts, and some self-assessment results. Then we're going to, once you kind of have that picture, we're going to open it up. Scott's going to ask you to think about what would you prioritize if you were building a cybersecurity strategic plan for this organization? What would be your strategy, right? The goal is just to see an example of how this process can work, give you a chance to discuss and explore and think strategically a little bit. And again, there are no right answers. There are many possible approaches to this that are valid, right? Every time we do this training, we get a variety of responses, and I don't think I've ever heard one that sounded completely nuts, right? Sometimes it's just what we want to avoid is option paralysis. So what would you do? Okay, so this organization is called Sasquatch. It's an organization dedicated to the search for and study of the Sasquatch and other cryptids. In terms of structure and history, it's been operational for the past 20 years. It operates out of a single centralized location in the US. It's embedded within an R1 university. It has a small but stable operating budget because of an endowment by an eccentric university donor, maybe a retired caveman lawyer. And there's really no leadership awareness or support for cybersecurity. It's just not, it hasn't really hit the leadership radar. Some other facts. So the parent university, that R1 school, provides security for all the on-premises servers and devices and stuff. We're just getting that by being around that school. The mission of Sasquatch, however, relies on a distributed network of commodity hunting cameras. This includes many models accumulated over many years. Many are no longer supported by the manufacturer. And there's no university awareness or support for these devices. I know this sounds just outlandish, like there's no science organizations that could ever kind of look this distributed and wild, but bear with me. So there's some privacy concerns were raised in the EU because they've got cameras over there too. And somebody had the idea that monitoring of European hunters might violate their privacy rights. And there's even some questions about whether Sasquatch, him or herself, might have some privacy rights. And we've seen over time, it appears there's some sort of the last image that got sent off that some common threat actors here are anti-monitoring activists, people who just don't want those cameras all over the place. So they did what we said and did this lightweight assessment, a rudimentary self-assessment. The results, not implementing on almost everything. However, they do have a cybersecurity lead. So there's an IT lead for this organization, also just sort of taking on that cybersecurity role as well. So we would say, yeah, the implementing must 7. There is some dedicated cyber FTE time, but it's just a sliver, right, of that IT lead. They have plans to draft a cybersecurity program strategic plan, but not implementing on everything else. So we're really early in trying to get some movement on this. I'm going to take this and you take that.
Cool. Spoilers. All right, so yeah, opening up to the audience, how would you prioritize? What are the things that stand out as the most important things to do soon?
I told you I was going to run. Thank you. It's all right.
Hearing about all those cameras and how different they were, how there's not really a good log of those, maybe an inventory of what they have that describes all of that, and then you can move from there, see what you want to keep, and maybe consolidate and make a more uniform equipment inventory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, prioritizing must 3.
So yeah, inventory is often a control, but it's so important to understanding your mission, knowing what your assets are, that it appears as this more general documentation thing.
Craig.
Yeah, so it's unclear whether they have a relationship with the information security group on their R1 campus or not, but if not, definitely that's something they should be trying to establish as early as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of that must 2 stakeholders and maybe must 14 external resources. We got another one over here.
As budget would be difficult to wrangle for this, it'd be using that initial inventory to identify what the next candidate is and what are your priorities in terms of spending per fiscal year to get out from under the technical debt.
So yeah, really prioritize your resources because, like we said, it was a fixed budget. There isn't free money floating around.
Yeah, I think I want to echo the comments about inventory. You can't even get off the mark on this project without knowing what your scope is, without knowing what you have to protect.
Mm-hmm. Another vote for inventory. Front center.
All right. I think number 5 would be important. You mentioned in the slide that leadership wasn't really aware at all of cybersecurity needs. So just kind of balancing that and number 1, must 5 and must 1. What's the big vision? Why are we trying to do this? What are we securing? And then getting that buy-in so you can make decisions that last.
Yeah, absolutely. Get leadership buy-in and then do some mission-focused.
Decisions that last. We may steal that and credit you appropriately.
Any other thoughts? Anyone thinking something completely different? Again, no wrong answers here. So if you're like, if you want, we can go back and pull up the slide with all the musts on it if you're struggling to remember them all. That's true. We got some one-pagers out there as well, so maybe share with a neighbor. And I will note, I am famous within Trusted CI for my ability to awkwardly sit in silence after I've asked a question until people fill the silence.
I don't know which must this would be, but thinking about the EU question, to call back to a different presentation, maybe they should just say, go ahead and make my day, the Clint Eastwood approach.
The EU, the legal thing is in there, right? As a, what do you do with that, right? In an outlandish hypo, that sounds as kind of especially outlandish, but put on the list along with leadership, the people you might want to talk to before something goes wrong. It could include just like taking GC out to lunch or something like that. Just an idea.
There are two things you can do about the EU issue. There's three, one of which is what my esteemed colleague up there suggested, which is tell the European data protection authorities to bring it. That hasn't worked all that well for Meta. You know, the Irish DPA is especially aggressive and seriously willing to throw down. The other two options, and the ones that I would probably pursue in order of preference, first, go to your university's general counsel. You shouldn't attempt to engage with European legal authorities without having your general counsel in the loop, and they may want to bring it. I have discussed GDPR at the University of Michigan, and large public research universities are not as scared of it as corporations are. That's all I'm going to say. And the other option is just stop operating in Europe. Right?
How are we going to find the truth if we're not?
The truth is out there. I agree.
Does Europe even have Sasquatch-esque legends?
That's the question we're trying to answer. This is
The
research.
Loch Ness Monster? Come on.
So if I heard correctly, Sasquatch is a subset inside an R1 organization.
That's right.
So why are we not looking at 14? Because they're looking at the rest of the organization as external to themselves, which is interesting in and of itself, but that's an R1, I guess. Not being from one, so no judgment there. But I'm imagining that there's either another research entity that has struggled with this and maybe completed it. So why must we reinvent the Sasquatch when there might already be Sasquatch out there?
Yeah, so another plug for Must 14.
Must 14 being external resources, right?
Yes.
So yeah, this is one of those who fails to use external resources in cybersecurity. I mean, but the point still remains, like, you cannot do this alone. You can't do it alone. So like, why aren't we just? I think that's just a fantastic point.
Joe, yeah, I mean, I think my two things were, first of all, I agree. And I think, I think external resources are really important. I also wanted to do a +1 for inventory control because, right, you have to have visibility. If you don't know that, then you're nowhere. Also, I point out that Europe has the Loch Ness Monster. So that's what we have to offer.
Yeah. Sasquatch takes all cryptozoological finds.
It sounds like we haven't gotten to incident response yet. So maybe the policy MUST-9 and the policy needs to be looked at to prepare for what it sounds like is coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll comment on that. You heard me say, if you're paying close attention earlier, that you need some policy. That doesn't mean you need one of each. It's not like Pokemon. One of the 3 policies that we always recommend, policies and procedural stuff, is IR, right? So you're hitting right on stuff that's in the FIG there.
Awesome. Anyone else want to throw in a thought? Otherwise, I'll show you what we came up with. Now, this is not the right answer, but this was basically when we thought about it, kind of a first thing we came up with. First things first, we said, as we heard a couple of people say as well, engage the parent university. Sounds like they're kind of operating in an isolated fashion, and there's a lot of resources that are available there. Let's go have a conversation with, our ISO. Let's see what resources they can bring to bear to help us go out and secure this network of cameras that they were completely unaware of. So that kind of made sense to us, maybe a good place to start. And then we talk about some of the other things that are going to be really important. See, a lot of commonalities as to what we talked about. Get a handle on that network of cameras. So one, must 8 is having comprehensive application. Like, does the security program actually reach all of those cameras? Can it do anything? Can it make updates? Or are they just kind of out there sending data and we can't touch them? And then actually handling our information assets. Let's get some documentation. Several votes I think we heard for that one. Maybe looking at some additional and alternate controls because, commodity hunting cameras are not the intended focus of NIST 800-171, for instance. And so we might need to think of some different controls that are going to work out in that kind of unusual environment. And then like some other people were saying, let's engage the leadership more. Like right now we're saying leadership has no idea about cybersecurity, right? They're focused on the Sasquatch. But maybe if we show them how a little bit more cybersecurity will help us find the Sasquatch, that's going to be really valuable. And then let's determine if this EU privacy thing is even a concern, right? Right now, it kind of has it could just be FUD, right? Maybe this is nothing. Maybe it's a big deal, but let's not just sit and worry about it. So let's go talk with some of the stakeholders. Let's engage counsel, as I think we heard Joe say. Let's get a handle on this and not just, run around in circles. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to ask, I should also note, we've got about 15 minutes left. So if anyone has some questions as they apply to your facility, you're like, hey, this is all great and hypothetical. Here's some practical stuff. Absolutely feel free to throw those our way. Otherwise, we'll kind of show you how we go from this to the next step in the strategic plan. So I'll brief pause. Anyone want to throw some reality into our fun times here? Here we go.
Thank you for this great conversation. So you touched on this leadership not a vacuum of leadership, but a vacuum of understanding the importance of the CI plan, and tying it back to the mission of the institution. I think that it's easier said than done when oftentimes leadership is playing whack-a-mole with budget themselves, and everything is an emergency, and therefore nothing's an emergency. Everything's a priority, and therefore nothing's a priority. So if you have a great example of the lack of communication between an organization and leadership and how they were able to turn the tide, and I hate to say the word tide right now, turn the table so that there was this consistent, sustained communication around the importance of cyber as it relates to the mission of the institution.
Yeah, great question. And Craig, also feel free to chime in here. I'll spare any, I'll anonymize names and faces to preserve the innocent. But I mean, when we think about ways to engage leadership, there's a couple of things that kind of naturally come up. One of them is let's just try to get some regular cadence. Let's go from nothing to a little bit. So if we can get 15 minutes once a month, that's better than nothing. And then maybe that 15 minutes can evolve into 30 as they start realizing, yeah, this stuff actually is kind of important. So that's sort of like an easy path. Maybe there's a little bit of resistance, but you can get in there. And if there's a problem where they're just stonewalling you, they're like, I don't care about security, this is a whole bunch of nonsense, then I think you really have to make the case for why security is important. And that kind of goes, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and show the next slide. If we're talking about, we're protecting Sasquatch, and Sasquatch's leadership is just not having it, then you got to go to them and say hey, if we don't have good security and we find the Sasquatch, but that data is not, the provenance is not completely, pristine, people aren't going to believe us, right? Our reputation is going to be tarnished. And then when we do make discoveries in the future, so showing how security directly affects the things they care about, And that's ultimately what the strategic plan is trying to do. It's saying, don't just do security off in a bunker, but like tie it in directly. And there's a bunch of ways to do that. Or like in this case, if the camera network goes down, we're not finding anything. So it's really important to make sure we preserve uptime. That's tying it to the mission. Yeah, Craig.
Yeah, I think we have seen some success when we have organizations take this cybersecurity strategic planning exercise and use it as a way to start a conversation with leadership that is not an ask, or it's not an ask for money, right? It's an ask for, we want to make sure we understand the mission that we're stumbling around trying to protect. Like, let's start this on your terms and what's important to you. I know I've seen this firsthand. Now, we were in there as third-party assessors, and that can help things get going too. But I've seen firsthand where the technical people are trying to, like, actively trying to pull insights and information from senior leaders about what's the most important. And leaders are willing to talk about that, talk about where are we trying to be at in 5 years. And sometimes that doesn't just, start to build some trust. It will really reveal, like, hidden agendas is the wrong word. Like, those people have that strategic mindset for the organization. They're balancing all of those problems. So I think we look for ways to engage leadership in other than just that ask, right? What do you need from them other than money? Just an idea.
Bob?
Leadership often gets engaged right after an incident or during an incident. And that's one way to really open up their eyes in terms of the importance of cybersecurity. Failing an incident at your location, if you can use peer institution type things, like one of the things that we've done with CyberTrack is libraries say, well, why do we need to worry about this? And it turns out there are lots of libraries that are getting ransomware attacks. So, things like that, peer pressure can, as they go off to their little conferences and learn about what's happening at other institutions. That's a good way to get them involved in terms of interest in cybersecurity.
Yeah, a little bit of scare tactics and also a plug for the Bob Coles Incidents for Hire company that I think is being spun up. I think we had another one over here.
Yeah, I was just going to say I've gotten a little bit of traction also with the idea that we're going to be accepting some risks. Would you like to have some input into which risks we're going to be accepting?
Yeah, great point. Okay.
Love it.
And I just wanted to also say, sometimes it's helpful if you go in with successes that you have already completed. So you're not just always coming with, we need to do more, we have to do more, but you have to balance that with, here's what we're already doing to secure your research, to secure the environment. We've identified some gaps. We want you to help prioritize those gaps for us.
Yeah. And then I think I saw Joe in the back.
It's potentially a risky approach and depends on relationships, but somebody at your office of general counsel could be a good ally on this. They tend to spot risks and be very interested in making sure they're appropriately resolved. So if you go to them for legal advice, yeah, we're doing this in Europe, GDPR, yeah, we have a cybersecurity potential open issue here, and they may then be willing to make that conversation with leadership happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, as a lawyer, I'll say that even better would be take me to lunch when you don't have a legal issue at all. Like, just try to form that connection. When you're thinking, in this case, thinking about, you need to have a relationship with the institution, and cybersecurity's role is to keep risk under control. Those other parts of the organization that keep risk under control, maybe with the exception of HR, could have the potential to be to be allies, people you can bounce ideas off of, people who can be champions, people who might be have more experience talking to those senior leaders. I wanted to just emphasize, and I do love food.
Yeah, Craig's fishing for free lunches over here. All right, I'll walk through this slide, and then we'll take the rest of the time for any remaining questions people have just on real life stuff, getting out of the Sasquatch. So like we said here, we're trying to build a strategic plan for Sasquatch. So first, we had to figure out what their mission was. We identified a couple of priorities, but we think if we were to super simplify it down to one sentence, the number one thing they care about as a cybersecurity program is maximizing the uptime of that network of cameras. Because if the cameras go down, the mission's kaput. And then based on that, they said, okay, how are we actually going to maximize uptime of those cameras? We have to have a strategy for that. And so they said, well, let's see if we can minimize the complexity of our camera situation, right? We got models from all kinds of years. Some of them are out of date. Can we streamline that? Can we get down to just a couple of models maybe? And then we really are good at rapidly responding to system downtime. So we have a good process where if the camera goes down, we can get it back up quickly, make sure that we've got that uptime of those cameras. So again, these are like soundbite versions of what we would imagine would ultimately be a more complex statement of mission and strategy, but it kind of shows you how to think about it, right? Figure out what your priorities are, and then figure out how you're going to go about implementing those priorities. And then we get down here to the timeline and milestones. What are the specific things we're going to try and do? Well, it turns out first thing we need to do is maybe use our strategic plan to engage leadership, right? Start those conversations and show them how we're thinking about it. Show them how we're thinking about how cybersecurity enables the mission. Begin outreach to that parent university, like let's get those conversations going, maybe take a lawyer or two out to lunch, and then actually let's start inventorying those devices. Figure out what we're dealing with right now so that we can begin doing that simplification. And then the timeline of milestones. Do we have it on the next slide? No. So we think about it, you break it down over a period of probably 3 to 5 years, and maybe you're only talking quarterly. So, Q1 2025, what are we doing? And then Q1 2027, what are we doing? Think out a couple of years and see where you're trying to get over that period of time. Maybe the milestones become a little bit fuzzier as you get further out, but then you can sharpen them as you are moving along, actually executing that timeline. Okay, so just really briefly, next steps. If you're, you haven't run out of the room already, you're interested in maybe taking the next step with this, a couple of things you can do right now. One, you can go download the framework implementation guide. It's available on the website. You can link to it from the slides. You can find it from the framework, trustedci.framework. You can do that basic self-assessment Craig identified against the musts. Yes, no, maybe, pretty straightforward, shouldn't take you too long. You can download and use our cybersecurity program strategic plan, which will actually help you walk through all of these things tying your program to the mission. We have a number of other templates and tools that are available on our website. And as we talked about yesterday, I think, we're expanding those templates and tools. So there's going to be even more stuff to be on the lookout for. And then if you're still looking even more, you can't get enough of us, reach out to Trusted CI for help. As we talked about, we're going to start rolling out residencies, but also we've got the cohorts. So if this is something that you're really trying to make progress on, we've got a bunch of offerings that'll help you do that. And with that, we've got about 5 minutes. Happy to answer any questions anyone might have. And I get to showcase my pregnant paws. I think here in the back.
Thank you. So this question may not fit in this box, but I think it's a little bit relevant. So I try to give example, the war strategy during the Stone Age era and the war strategy in nuclear bomb era. So these two strategies. So right now the framework, I think all the security framework, all designed before quantum computing. And in that quantum computing is not, I don't think is included any of from work. What is the threat coming from that? And also transitioning from regular cryptography like this mere securing mechanism, main ingredient of our cybersecurity, that moving to the post-quantum. So this, I said, it may not fit, but this is kind of a strategic plan, and I think the framework. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try responding to that a little bit. Part of one of the strengths we think the Trusted CI framework has, we'll have to see how it plays out, is that it's technology neutral, right? If adversarial AI or quantum or whatever else makes cybersecurity that much more complex or difficult, you're still going to need you're especially going to need leadership involvement. You're still going to need to work with external resources to have a fighting chance of protecting yourself, and so on. So I think our hope is that this framework, to the extent that we survive, the framework can survive and keep helping people as technology changes. Did you have?
Yeah, I apologize. I couldn't totally hear the question with people coming in and out, but I'll just echo what Craig was saying. I think one of our strongest selling points is the fact that we are fundamentally, universal and timeless. And so that even as the world changes, as long as, humans don't get overtaken by the AI overlords and we don't even have to worry about this stuff anymore, that we're talking about things at a level of abstraction that they're always going to be relevant. And we're actually better positioned to adapt to sort of changing environments. And it's one of the things we're doing right now is the musts are very broad, generally applicable. And then our implementation guidance is a little bit more, we dive into some more specific details, and those specific details change. And as they change, we can provide updated guidance on hey, what does it mean to involve leadership when your leadership is an AI, right? If you're going, I don't know, hopefully far into the future where I don't have to worry about that. But we like to think we're pretty future-proof.
That sounds like a new hypo to build out.
Yeah.
So we are about out of time. Thank you so much for the questions and the comments. Some really great ideas. I'm gonna take and steal and recycle some things that I heard today. So really appreciate your attention and your engagement. This was fun for us, and I hope you got something out of it. Thank you all.